And now we're live. Hello!
Hey guys! Welcome to Studying the Storm. I am Gillyweed SC2, or Gillyweed, or Gilly.
She's a woman of many names.
I am.
I'm just Anna Prosser. Nice to see you. And as you can see, we're joined by the one, the only, Idra, Greg Fields. Thanks for coming on, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me.
He's going to be our guest tutor today, and if this is the first time you're tuning into Studying the Storm, we'll tell you a little bit about what this is. First of all, you're on Misscliks. Misscliks is a community dedicated to uplifting and supporting and providing exposure for female role models in geek and gaming culture, and just ultimately providing a really positive and safe online environment for everybody, especially geeks and gamers. And Studying the Storm is a show dedicated to learning about Studying the Storm, sharing what we know about learning about Heroes of the Storm. That's what the game's called that we're playing. Learning about Heroes of the Storm, sharing what we know with you because some of you may not have alpha access yet, and then eventually following the game into whatever it becomes in the competitive scene. So we have lots of things we'll do each day. JC, you want to tell us about those?
Yes, so our idea is that each week we'll focus on a specific topic and we will bring on a guest who will be able to tell us more about that topic. And we're starting out relatively easy and then building into the more competitive parts as we go along, with the idea that eventually Anna and I would be able to cast the game. We've always been interested in casting it and we want to be able to do that. We love Heroes, we love Blizzard games, and so it's our chance to do that. We'll also be doing a character spotlight every week, and as always, we'll be having a weekly quiz. If it's your first time here, it's a good time because we're going to be doing a quiz this week where you can tweet us questions by using the hashtag STSshow, and we will pick different questions and ask them and quiz each other and try to get as many right as we can in 10 minutes. So if you guys have good questions from what we've learned this week or from what we've learned in previous weeks, be ready to tweet those questions to us. You can tweet them at any time, and then when we get to the quiz part, we will be asking them of each other.
Yeah, it's our way of not only letting you be involved in the show, but actually utilizing your amazing skill and ideas, because we really want to learn. We want to learn faster and we want to learn better, and you guys really can help us. You've been an awesome community so far. We're so stoked to have you interacting with us. And please feel free to use the chat and try to, speak with us as we go along. We're going to try and do a better job of watching that chat and seeing what you guys have to say during the show. I'm a hashtag new broadcaster, kind of a noob, so I've been not doing a very good job of that, but I will try. Feel free to yell at me if you would like during the show. But Greg's here, and he's gonna be covering our topic this week, which is team composition and drafting. And this is an area that I think it's safe to say for both of us, Gillyweed, as people who kind of started in more the RTS area and have kind of been chugging our way into MOBAs and this new hero brawler, that team composition is something that I feel like I really struggle with and don't have much knowledge on. And I think that Greg, as the strategist I know he is going to give us some really valuable information. So before we do that, though, we do want to review what we learned last week in case you weren't here. We talked a lot about different character types. So I'm going to show you guys some of the characters on the Heroes of the Storm website, and let's talk about the different, let's do just a quick review, Gilly, of the different character classes.
Sure, so there are 4 different character classes in Heroes of the Storm, and we went over them last week. One is the Assassin, known for being the big damage dealers, but not not a lot of health, so they die rather easily generally. There's also the Warriors. They are known for being beefier, but they typically don't deal as much damage as those Assassins do. But they have some crowd control elements, and they're known for just being really tanky. There's also supports, and they do a variety of different things. Some crowd control there as well, some heals, shielding, lots of different things that the supports do, but they're generally designed to support the other characters, hence the name. And then finally you have the specialists, which are kind of the weird ones. They definitely took up the most of our topics of conversation. They're the ones that you haven't really seen too much, I guess, in other MOBAs, or if you have, then they're not grouped up specifically together like they are in Heroes, and they serve a variety of different functions, but they don't really have a sort of standard thing they all do. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Nice review.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then also we wanted to just mention that this week is a new hero week. A Nubarak just came out, and he is a warrior, which I kind of assumed just from his appearance that he was going to be a specialist. But he is a warrior. Greg, what do you think of a Nubarak so far?
The consensus from like everyone who has played him at wherever they've shown him, IEM or PAX or whatever, is that he's already really, really strong, and he's going to be maybe one of the best warriors in the game as soon as he's introduced. He has a ton of CC, a lot of survivability. It just seems like he's going to be really impactful. So he's actually one of the few heroes that we think is going to be released, and it's going to go like right into the competitive scene. Like he'll be picked as soon as he's available in tournaments and whatnot.
Nice. So usually you would see like a wait while people kind of figure out how to use him, you mean?
Yeah, generally speaking. I think like even until now, we're the only team who picks Chen a lot. Like every once in a while, other teams will throw him in to like fill in a role, but we're still like the only team who picks him just happily, regularly. So it usually takes quite a while for someone to settle in because you have to get used to him. You have to get used to working with him as a team, which takes quite a bit of time. And sometimes heroes just come out and they're not very strong. They need to be tuned. But it's sounding like a Nubarak is going to be right there right away.
Do you know what his difficulty will be?
In terms of like the Blizzard rating that they give him, I have no idea. But I don't know, probably like average, medium, whatever.
Okay.
His big CC ultimate, his cocoon thingy, I think isn't a skill shot, so that always makes it kind of easy. But I think his two other stuns, like his Impale and his Burrow Strike, I think those might be skill shots. So I guess that could make him a little bit difficult to use. It also depends on just how tanky he is, because it sounds like he really has to go in to have a lot of impact. So that's always a little bit dangerous if you have to go in and you're not too easy to survive with.
Right.
I'm so excited for Impale. It looks like reward lurkers, and I love lurkers. Yeah, I have a thing for spikes, apparently.
Kerrigan?
Yeah. Isn't hers also called Impaling Blades or something like that?
That's
Apparently I
either
like
the skill
Impaling.
or it's one of the talents for
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Anyways, so let's get into talking about team composition now that we kind of know Anubarak. And before we do that, though, Greg, let's talk a little bit about who you are. Could you explain to our audience, if they don't know who you are, where you come from, what you're doing, and what you do with heroes?
Yeah, I'm Greg Idra Fields. I've been involved in gaming in some way or another for the last like 12 years. I was a professional Brood War player, and then a professional StarCraft 2 player. And then I dabbled a bit in casting and commentary and that kind of thing for StarCraft 2. Retired like a year ago, maybe a little bit less now, and kind of moved on. But then Heroes came out, and I thought I would just play it for fun, maybe do a little bit on the side, just like produce videos for it or a little casting or whatever. And then I actually ended up getting really, really into it. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's going to be an esport, pretty much for sure. I also found a group of people I really like playing with. So we ended up making a competitive team, and we've been competing together, and I don't know, that's, like, you can't really say you're playing it professionally as an alpha.
Yeah.
If there were pro gamers at Heroes, then I guess I would be one of them.
Yeah, I would say that, because you're part of Team Snowflake, and I would say that Team Snowflake is probably one of the foremost teams, if there can be a foremost team in an alpha. So it's been really cool watching you guys play, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about where people can find you later, but can you talk about which tournaments you've been playing in and what that's like?
Yeah, I think there's 3, I hope I don't miss any. I'm pretty sure there's just 3 ongoing things right now. One of them is ESV, which is run by ESV Diamond, so any StarCraft fans who are watching might remember him from the Korean weeklies and whatnot. And that was a big, long, ongoing thing with group stages, and I think the finals are broadcasting this weekend. And the finals, we've played all the matches, so I have to be careful not to spoil anything. But,
Okay.
but currently, we're about to broadcast the finals, and it's my team Snowflake against the other team, SMG, who's the most accomplished team thus far in the alpha, in the finals there. And then MVI, which is being run by MYI and this site called Versosphere. It basically just took the 4 best teams in the alpha, SMG, us, Glorious Gaming, and ESV Wildfire, and just had us play a little bracket. And I forget where exactly that one is, so I'm not going to say who's playing who, but we are still in it. We're doing well in it. And then there's another league that just came up called the HPL that's still in the group stages and still ongoing, and that's still pretty early on, like just kind of playing the early matches and weeding out the bad teams.
That's the one that's on Nexus Champ, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
Awesome.
good luck in the past of your
Yeah.
upcoming.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll try and retroactively apply that.
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go. It still counts.
Totally.
So let's get right into this. Greg, teach us a little bit about the basic rules of thumb for team comp, because where we're starting is basically we generally know that you should have a little bit of each something, right? Help us know what to do from there.
That's pretty fair. Over the last couple of months, it's kind of been seesawing back and forth between the most important roles being the ranged DPS, range damage dealers like Vala, Tychus, Tassadar, and Falstad. Those are like the big four. And then the damage dealing warriors. Like, there's two classes of warriors. There's like the hard tanks like ETC and Diablo who do essentially no damage, but they're just good at surviving and they have a lot of CC. And then there's like the Tyraels, the Arthuses, the barbarians who have a lot of damage, but they're not quite as tanky. And the damage dealing warriors, we call them bruisers. I think that's a pretty general MOBA term. The bruisers are much more impactful, generally speaking, than the tanks. The tanks have to have a lot of team synergy to really use them that well. So the most important thing has been bouncing back and forth between the bruisers and the ranged DPS. Right now, most teams are prioritizing the ranged DPS, but the bruisers are still important. So generally, you'll have the best 2 assassins you can get, and then the best 2 bruisers you can get, and then the supports generally got nerfed in the last patch. And so none of them are super, super impactful right now. So unless you have a really special thing, like if you really want to do some kind of wombo combo team fight kind of thing, then you pretty much want Uther, but even Malfurion works for that. So supports are a pretty low priority, generally speaking, unless you really need a specific thing out of them. And so everyone's just bouncing back and forth between the ranged assassins and the bruisers.
Okay. So you were talking, help me make sure that I cement this in my memory. So what are the best examples of the difference between a bruiser and just a normal tank?
It's almost 100% the damage output. Like Tyrael, Arthas, Barbarian, and Chen, basically, are the 4 who have really good damage output while being pretty survivable. And then, I don't know, Diablo gets picked a decent amount because his ultimate Epoch combos well with a lot of big teamfight spells. So he gets picked a decent amount. And then you'll also get like a rare ETC if it synergizes well with something on the team. Mostly because of his auras. He has like a lot of attack speed auras and movement speed auras. So if you have a lot of like auto-attacking assassins, then he works pretty well with them. Plus he's good at keeping them alive because he has a lot of like crowd control and knockbacks and whatnot. So in those rare cases, that'll be used, but generally speaking, you're going to be looking at Tyrael, Arthas, Barbarian, and then sometimes Chen.
Okay.
For the tankier kind of heroes.
I see. What about Stitches?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about him. He's kind of unique because he seems like he should be a pure tank. He has the second highest HP pool in the game and whatnot, but he actually puts out a lot of damage in fights just because of his passive. Like, if you do damage to him, then he like puts out this cloud of gas or whatever that damages everyone around him. Actually gives him really high damage output, and hooks, of course, can just be absolutely game-changing. Like, at any point, you could all of a sudden have a 5v4 for the next 40 seconds just because you hit a lucky hook, and then he's kind of in the game off of it. He's actually banned. He was banned almost every game in the previous patch. They took Sprint off of him, so he's not quite as good for pickoffs anymore, but he's still very top tier. He does require a different kind of team fight, though. You have to be a little bit more patient to really take full advantage of him. Whereas with like a Barbarian or a Tyrael or whatever, whenever you get an opportunity, you can pounce on it immediately, which is really, really valuable to have because like no one's playing perfectly yet. It's an alpha, so being able to punish mistakes is really, really valuable. And Barbarian and Tyrael are fantastic at that.
So you generally stay away from people like Muradin, Diablo, or ETC, you're saying?
Diablo and ETC are situational. Muradin, he got picked a little bit for a while, but generally speaking, he's just too low impact, and that's just kind of the generally true for the more pure tanks. Like, they have a decent amount of CC, but it's just not enough for the fact that they have almost no damage output.
Okay. Interesting, because Muradin is one of the easier heroes that we know a lot of people are picking right when they start just because he's a little simpler to play. So maybe that's kind of where the skill gap starts to show itself, I guess. And then Anub'arak, of course, is here, too.
Yeah, Anub'arak, we'll have to see exactly what his numbers are and exactly how easy it is to get. I think the biggest thing is going to be how easy it is to get multiple person stuns off of Impale and Burrow Strike. If it's relatively easy to get 2 3-man stuns, then he's going to be very, very strong right from the start. Because I don't think he's going to have too much damage, but I think he has enough AoE CC that'll make up for it.
Okay. So generally right now, if we're looking to put warriors on our team, we're looking at Tyrael, Chen, Barbarian,
Arthas.
Yeah, Arthas, Tyrael are like a slight little bit above the other two. Barbarian is like the most tilted towards punishing mistakes. If you're playing against a bad team, Barbarian is going to be fantastic for you. But if you're playing against a team that's really, really conscientious about staying spread out and protecting their squishies and whatnot, then Barbarian becomes really hard to use, because everything with her is about getting like a multi-person leap, a big AoE stun to start off the fight.
Right.
Whereas Tyrael and Arthas are much more self-sufficient, and like they have a lot of damage output over time. They're very good at sustaining themselves. Tyrael has a lot of disruption and whatnot. And then Chen is a little bit weird. We love him. LZ Gamer is maybe one of the best Chen players, maybe the best Chen player, and we haven't seen anyone else use him as well as he does. So it's kind of hard to tell where exactly he lies until other teams start picking him up, but we love using him, and to the extent that we'll actually like let other teams have Tyrael or Arthas, so we can have a better damage dealer, and then we'll pick up Chen later on in the draft because he's not really contested that much. So.
Is that just because you think other people maybe haven't figured out how to utilize him as well yet?
Maybe that, and there is this thing where he occasionally bugs out and you can't use his Q anymore, but it happens very, very rarely, so it's a little bit of a risk to pick him in that. I think it's more just because people aren't comfortable with him yet.
I feel like his barrel where he pushes people around can be pretty, like,
devastating.
Yeah, well, I mean, it can be really good, definitely, but probably very difficult to like nail down situationally. So maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, that's actually exactly true. Like, everyone looking at him right from the start was like, Barrel Ultimate is going to be stupid OP, but really hard to use. But that's definitely going to be a way to go on him. And then LZ Gamer started experimenting with the other one, the Split Ult, that everyone thought was going to suck, because you can't really control the spirits independently. And it turns out it's actually really, really good. It makes you great at absorbing damage, because you can pretty much dodge out of anything. So you can just go in, take a bunch of damage, then you do your split, and you become invulnerable for a bit, and you have a second life bar. It's also really, really good at body blocking. If you control it well enough, it's almost impossible to get away from it. And it's just really, really disruptive because it becomes so hard to move around, and there are so many targets, it just gets kind of confusing in the team fights and whatnot. So that's another thing. A lot of teams are still trying to make the barrel work, where they take a lot of time to come back, or to like actually experiment with the spirit ult. So I think that might be something that's holding them back.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't looked as much into Chen. I'm just looking at those now and showing them on the website. That looks really cool. Because the only ult I've really seen is the barrel so far.
Yeah, everyone does it. It should be like disabled for pub games. It's so terrible trying to use that if you're not like 100% coordinated, because you're just going to mess up everything your team tries to do. It's very frustrating.
Okay, so go ahead.
As far as the standard team comp, then you said it's typically like the two ranged DPS, and then two sort of bruisers, and then the support. Was that what you would say the typical team comp is?
Yeah, right now it is. My team actually kind of thinks that it's going to move more towards 2 damage, 1 bruiser or tank, and then 2 supports as the game progresses and people get better. It's like harder to execute, but we think if you execute it perfectly, then it has higher potential than the 2 bruisers. But for the time being, just like until everyone gets better and we get more practice with that, the 2 bruiser thing is definitely much easier to use and win with.
Why do you think it's going to trend more towards support? Just because you're going to have less squishiness or more initiation, or?
Just sustain fights. Like, if you execute perfectly, if everyone has their heals and shields on the target that the bruisers are going on, if all of your damage is positioned well and spread out well enough that no kind of AoE is going to hit both of them at the same time, and just everyone is going in and out of the fight at the proper time and balance, like, if your supports are all very on top of their cooldowns and you know when they're going to have you heal up and you back off at the right time and then you go back in at the right time, there's just a lot of potential to play better than your opponents there, and we think it's enough that it's going to outweigh the strength of the bruisers, but it's obviously much harder than just having a barbarian leap and then
done everything.
And just run everyone. Yeah.
So I'm kind of going through, and I know you guys can't see this while I'm on the stream, but we've been looking at the warriors, we've been talking about them, and let's chat a little bit before we move on, because I know we want to talk about specific team types and ways you might alter this general guideline. But let's talk a little bit about those ranged DPS assassins. What are some of the ones that are really being used right now, Greg?
There's 4 that are like a cut above everyone else. It's Vala, Tassadar, Tyrael, and Tassadar is listed as a support, but he's essentially an assassin or a ranged DPS with the way he's played competitively. So Vala, Tychus, Tassadar, and Falstead. And then you have like secondary damage, which is acceptable. Like, you'll trade it off in order to get the better bruisers. That's something SMG actually does quite a bit. They'll pick Arthas and Tyrael really early on in the draft, and then they'll take a Zagara, who kind of plays like an assassin, or a damage dealer, or a Rainer, or something that's not as good on their own, but in certain situations they'll feel is good enough that they'll take that as like a trade-off to getting the really good bruisers.
So why are those 4 the ones that stand out of the assassins? What's wrong with the rest of them?
Part of it is self-sustain or survivability. They all have good escapes or good ways to keep themselves alive. You have essentially a double health bar on Tychus. They all have dashes or movements. Tassadar has he has a big shield boost with his Archon, and then he can E out of essentially anything. He becomes invincible. Whereas Raynor is kind of a sitting duck until you're level 20 and you get Blink. So he's very, very dependent on his supports keeping him alive, which is quite a handicap, even though he has good damage output. And the other one is just the damage output, like the burst from a false start laser. If you have more of a team fighty or a composition that can blow one person up, that's pretty amazing, like just taking one person out of the fight right away or putting that much damage on a whole team. And then Tychus, Tassadar, and Vala just have great damage over time output.
So neither of those cloaked assassins are really working for you? The Nova or Zeratul?
Well, Zeratul plays more like a utility hero. Void Prison is one of the best spells in the game. It can be used to cancel stuff, it can be used to isolate people, it can be used to set up big kind of combo team fights. So he's really, really good, but it's in more of like a utility role. So you'll take him instead of a bruiser, or maybe instead of your second damage, depending on what kind of your lineup you're doing, but he's very situational, and you're not picking him for his damage. And Nova is just, she has no escapes, she's super, super squishy, and you can't rely on not being seen against good players just because, like, if you're paying attention, you'll see the blur. So it just kind of doesn't work. And she doesn't offer enough besides her burst, and her burst is unlikely to actually kill someone if they have a support playing attention.
That makes sense.
From the chat, you didn't mention any specialists in your like initial standard team comp. Is it because those are more of the situational, you typically build around them, or is it more of a people haven't really figured out how to use the specialist for sure yet?
Yeah, it's very situational. You can pick Zagara. Actually, you pick Zagara quite a bit. She's the most used specialist. She's a pretty decent option if you can't get one of the good damages. Or if you need Ma to interrupt something. Ma is one of the better teamfight spells. And then Nazeebo, or Witch Doctor, is also a good option if you're lacking damage and you have, like, they don't have anything that's good at disrupting her, if they don't have a Tyrael or a Barbarian or a Tyrande or whatever. And if they don't have any options to disable from long range, then she's great because of her ultimate, or he. Abathur, I think, is someone who deserves a lot more play right now. I think he's really, really good. And he's less, like, they fixed on some maps, he used to be very, very low impact, Haunted Mines in particular. And some of the changes they made to the maps made him a little bit more viable there. So he used to be a really risky pick, because on some maps you get him and he'd just be like worthless. But now he's a little bit more universal. Gazlo doesn't get played at all, he's just not very good. And Hammer, after her nerfs, is pretty weak as well. Murky actually seems much better than he used to be, but I'm not sure if he can be competitive just yet. He's still a bit weird.
He's like trolly.
Yes.
When they
his
first...
March, if you can get him in a composition where he can actually use his March well, it's actually pretty respectable now, just for the team fight spell alone, plus his annoyingness. But I mean,
he is so annoying.
Getting up a body, so I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about Abathur, is that sometimes it feels like if you've got an Abathur, you just end up being 4v5 a lot of the time. But I guess that's just because the person playing Abathur really has to know how to use them correctly.
Really?
Yeah, there's a very high skill cap on him, but if you look at his numbers, he usually has one of the highest damage outputs in the game. Like, just his Q and W, like, off of the symbiote, his Q and W over time do quite a bit of damage. His little mines are very, very disruptive, and they give you a lot of map vision, which is very underrated and super, super important. And then if you have them with certain heroes, then just having double, like having double Arthas, or having double Falstad, or whatever, it can just be game-breaking in team fights. Double Odin plus Bloodlust is something that was really popular for a while with Abathur. So he does require a composition where he has someone really good to use his ultimate evolution on. But in those situations, he can definitely be good. Plus his split pushing potential late game is pretty much unmatched. So if you get him on a map like Garden or something, then it's going to be a huge pain for your opponents to deal with. But all the specialists are pretty situational, besides maybe Zagara.
So, I could, like, ask you questions all day, so I can tell this episode's going to go a little bit later. But but that's okay, because if we didn't mention this before, guys, we actually aren't going to do a play session this week, obviously, because Heroes of the Storm is down. So JC and I are going to do a mock draft later. So
we need all the help we can get.
Yeah. And now I forgot my question.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It was my own fault. But I guess... Oh, so we talked a little bit about the standard, like what you should normally do. We talked about having 2 bruisers, 2 ranged DPS, and a support, sometimes maybe moving toward those 2 supports. But let's talk a little bit about popular variations on that, things that are really working in the competitive scene, if you will, that are not that typical build. And then also I'd love to hear a little bit about how maps affect who you will draft, because I think that's one of the coolest things for me in Heroes of the Storm is that you have different maps as opposed to just the same one every time.
Yes.
Yeah. Once we actually get to the point where we know what map we're going to be playing on, that actually might be the single biggest thing that Heroes has over League and Dota. It's just going to add so much complexity to the drafting and the kind of lineups you want to play and the diversity of strategies. Because right now, if you have a map like Haunted Mines, then the first fight, which is going to happen around level 3 or 4, can essentially, most of the time, decide, because if you get the biggest golem, then it snowballs really, really hard. So you want to have a super, super early game focused lineup with a lot of healing and not a lot of assassins, because they tend to, they're more focused on scaling in the late game. If you have like a Rainer, you're just kind of screwed, that kind of stuff. So you have to be really, really early game focused for that. Whereas if you have a map like Garden of Terror, it's going to go 25 plus minutes no matter what, essentially. So you want to have a really more late game focused team. So there's a whole bunch of things that you're going to have to keep in mind once custom games are out and you can actually know what map you're going to play.
Do you think it's possible that once we know the maps first, that the variations of different types of characters, obviously once we have more heroes, it'll change a lot too, but there will be more variations once you will know the map first as well?
Absolutely. It really opens up a lot more in the way of pocket strategies. I don't know, right now a lot of the weird heroes aren't getting played too much. Everything is kind of stable, or it's rotating around between the bruisers and the DPS, but a patch or two ago, Hammer was a huge pocket pick. If you didn't have either a ton of mobility to just run around her, or really hard engaged to actually be able to fight her straight up, if someone last picked her and you weren't ready for her, you could just kind of lose to it, depending on the map. But the problem was, if you get her on, Haunted Mines, she couldn't go down into the mines and fight. That was just terrible for her. Or if she got Garden of Terror, then it was really easy to run around and backdoor around her. So you kind of couldn't pick her, even though she could have been one of the strongest pocket picks in the game. And as they introduce more and more heroes and they mess with the balance and try and bring those specialists into the game more, that situation is going to occur a ton. So once we have the custom maps, then teams will actually be able to create weird or unusual strategies around those and actually be able to implement them, because they're not just flipping a coin hoping for a map.
So right now in the competitive scene, there is no way to predict or know which map you're going to play. You're just blindly choosing teams, right?
Right.
Because there's no functionality in the game that you can choose a map.
Yeah, everything is pretty jury-rigged right now. We go into a chat channel and we do the draft that way with no interface or anything, and then we just queue up at the same time and hope that our MMRs are close enough that we can.
Do you ever have a misfire?
It doesn't?
Oh yeah, if the top teams, the teams that are playing the MVI or whatever, if we queue at the same time and there isn't another one of those top 4 teams queuing, then we'll get each other 100% of the time. But if you go to the HPL, where it's kind of a bunch of random teams plus the good teams, there's been times where I think SMG tried for hours on end to hit a team and they just couldn't do it. So you get situations like that sometimes.
And then you have to play through the whole game because you can't leave and it'll make you rejoin. Right?
No, if everyone leaves at once, then your team just gets forfeit. But then you dump a bunch of MMR and it becomes hard to scrim against the good teams. So
interesting.
You gotta be careful with that.
Well, that's what we get for having such an awesome alpha that,
Yeah, we expect it to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why doesn't this
trying to
work?
make it work, and it's been out for 6 months, and it shouldn't even be out yet. So
Yeah.
Gotta temper your expectations, but it is kind of frustrating at times.
Totally. So, what are some of the most common variations on that typical basic team composition that you would see or that, you really like, Greg?
I think the most common weird thing is either Abathur or Nazebo. A lot of the mid-tier teams really like picking, we've seen this, there was a match just recently, it was against us, I forget which team it was, but they picked Tyrael Barb first, and then they last picked Nazebo, so they tried to take away all of the ranged engagement, and then pick Nazebo, and their entire plan was just get a good leap, and then have a Witch Doctor ult that we couldn't get to. And that kind of thing seems to be really common among the mid-tier teams, and I think it's actually pretty powerful situationally, but just if you get one fight where the Nazebo's out of position, you kill her early, then you just flat out win the fight, so it's still a little bit risky. And like I said, I think Abathur deserves a lot more play, and we're seeing more and more strategies with him. Yeah, I'd say the two of those. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of weird stuff going on right now. I feel like everyone is pretty settled into the double damage, double bruiser, one support thing. But those are the two weird ones.
So we talked a little bit about the draft, but JC, I know both of us, you have tons of questions written down, so I want to give you time to answer those. But both of us wanted to learn a little bit more about like how you go about being the person doing the draft. Because are you the drafting captain? Is that your role on your team, Greg?
You know, of course, in like a competitive game, everyone will talk about it. You want to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. But yeah, when we're playing scrim, sometimes I'll just do the draft like while they talk about whatever else. And I am the one who like tracks everyone, like all the other teams' picks and bans. I'm generally the one who tries to put together some kind of plan going into drafts, or at least present something for everyone to talk about. And I don't know, we almost always end up agreeing, but if it came down to it, I think I would be the one to like be the tiebreaker and make the final decision. If anything, I think I should actually be more assertive about it, because that was one problem we had a lot early on, like before we even had the current lineup, is just we did it almost completely by consensus. It was a bunch of RTS players. We had no idea how it was supposed to be done, so we just all, like everyone would be throwing in ideas. And everyone has different priorities, because like if you're a support or if you're a DPS or you're a bruiser, you view the game from different angles and you have different priorities and whatnot. So one person would be like, we should really fear the Tyrael here, or we should really fear the volley here, we got to take that away. And we'd end up with just stupid piecemeal drafts, because we try and come at it from a bunch of different angles and we worry about a bunch of different things. So when we recognized that, I kind of took over, but it's still a bit of a consensus thing.
So you mentioned that each person is fulfilling sort of a role then, which is pretty typical, I think. Like one person will typically pick supports. Is that the case in Heroes as well?
Yeah, because the meta is kind of fluid, like it's not exactly 2 bruisers, 2 damage, and 1 support every single game. Almost every team has at least one player who kind of rotates around a lot. For us, it's Elzy Gamer. Like he started out playing mostly the utility supports, and he plays the weird ones like Zeratul and Kerrigan and whatnot. And now he's more on the secondary bruisers like Barb or Chen or Arthas or whatever. But other than that, we have one person who pretty much always plays tanky heroes, and then we have Keelax who's always support, and I'm almost always range damage, and Faye is also almost always range damage unless there's like a special hero we have her play because she's really good at.
The reason I asked is because when I've watched the picks, and I know it's very early on, I've seen the people are listed in order, and you have to go in that order. Do you get to pick the order that people get to pick? So like say, oh, we need this person to go first. Do you get to choose that?
Oh, that's totally the result of the way they're doing the graphics. Like when we do the drafting, it's just all of us in a channel, and I sit there and talk, and the other team's drafter sits there and talks, and we'll ban one, they'll ban one, and we'll pick one, they'll pick 2, and you can pick in any order or whatever, and then just whoever wants the hero plays the hero.
Okay, I didn't know if it was randomly you went in and it was like, okay, our support has to pick first, and there's no way to change heroes. Like, in League, you can swap, but you can't do that in Heroes, so I was wondering how that worked.
It's essentially like Dota without an interface, just the captain picks everything, and then whoever wants the hero picks it at the end of the draft.
Okay, that's good to know. Do you want to maybe just go through, like, the typical... I mean, I guess you kind of did, but go through how the drafting phase actually plays out.
Just like the actual...
Like who picks when?
The format of the draft?
Yeah.
Most in practices and in MVI and ESV, or ESC, it's just 1 ban per person. The team that's going to pick first bans first. And then they have first pick, they pick 1 hero. Then the other team has 2 picks. Then the first team has 2 picks, the other team has 2 picks, first team has 2 picks, and then the team that drafted second gets the last single pick. However, in HPL, one of the broadcasts on Nexus Champs, they do same bans, then first pick, then 2 picks, 2 picks, 2 picks, and then they do 1 pick back and forth all the way through to the end. So a little variation there.
So just 1 ban, always?
Yeah, everyone just kind of... We experimented with 2 bans per team early on in the alpha, but we just kind of came to the conclusion that the hero pool isn't big enough yet. Because like I think there's 29 heroes right now, and some of them just kind of flat out aren't viable, so it's a pretty limited pool to select from. Ideally, down the road, once we get a lot of heroes, it'll be full on like a Dota draft with 5 picks, 5 bans per team, going back and forth, a lot more interaction. That introduces a lot more strategy into the draft, and I really, really hope they implement that for competitive play once the hero pool supports it. But for the time being, just everyone kind of came to the consensus that there's only enough heroes to do 1 ban.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, so pretty much all my questions were answered by order of people picking.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. I was so confused.
So I guess to sum it all up, I wanted to know, I know that the draft is obviously like, oh, we lost Greg. No, come back, Greg.
No. My Skype crashed. I don't know what happened.
We can still hear you. Oh, there you are. That was good. Resolved quickly. Thank you.
Yay.
So obviously the draft is really important. But how important, like if you get a bad draft and you're just really unhappy with it, is that the game lost for you? Or in Heroes, is there a lot more wiggle room, or is it more important or less important than other games that would use a draft?
It's hard to rank them because I've played both League and Dota, and I was decent at Dota, but never like competitive, so I don't have the best experience to draw from, just to make an analogy. But I mean, it's absolutely possible to win because you figured out something about the draft. That was actually, SMG is like very diverse and very, very good right now. But they started out winning a bunch because they figured out things quicker than everyone. They were first to the Bloodlust composition. They started using Zagara better than everyone else. Kind of Kerrigan Diablo to an extent, but not, that one was more just execution. And then there's teams like Wildfire. Wildfire went on like a 2-week stretch where they just beat everyone, despite the fact that their players aren't really very good, just because they figured out a lot of good synergies between various heroes, and they were just picking heroes that worked well together and they were good at executing it. And then everyone else kind of figured out you take away Uther, Falstad, Tassadar from them, and they completely fall apart. So like they were entirely based off the drafts. So figuring something out early on can make it much, much easier for you to win. And being good at recognizing how to mess up what your opponents are good at can also be very good. The problem with that, though, is since you only have the 1 ban a piece, if you want to take away something from your opponents, it actually gets really, really difficult, because that means you just have to pick them. So, like, if it's something like an Uther can be pretty good in pretty much any scenario. So if you know your opponents really want an Uther, then you just pick them and it's fine. But if they really want a Diablo or something, which is like very important to Wildfire's drafts, then you have to pick a Diablo, and Diablo's only good with synergy, so that can mess you up a lot. So that's actually one of the finer points of drafting.
In a question from chat, in terms of balance in team comp, is there a certain role that you think needs more like balance, needs a little help at this point?
I don't know. Everything is pretty fluid. Like there are teams, like I said, bruisers and ranged DPS is almost equal. Like there are some teams that'll prioritize DPS, some teams that'll prioritize the bruisers, and it's been going back and forth for the last month or two. I feel like supports might be a little bit undertuned right now, but I'm not even sure about that. The specialists in general obviously kind of lack a place, but I think they're also kind of designed for that. They're meant to be like the weird heroes who have niche roles, and that will come into play much more like we were talking about when we have custom maps and we can actually know how we're going to be able to use them. So I think on the whole, it's actually in a pretty decent state, you know, keeping in mind that it's an alpha.
Of course, of course. And maybe those specialists will also come into play more when there's a way bigger pool that they could synergize with, instead of just the small pool that we have currently.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because one of the hardest things in other MOBAs is, at least as far as I know, and from what I can tell, it's really important to go in with like a plan for what kind of lineup you want, so that you know you're going to end up with synergy and something you're comfortable with and something you're practiced with. And in other MOBAs you can do that because, like in Dota, if you say I want to teamfight support with a big AoE ultimate, then you have like 3 or 4 different ones to choose from. Whereas if you do that here, you have Uther and maybe kind of Malfurion. So if you go in with a strategy that hinges on that, and then the other team bans or picks Uther, then what are you going to do? So it's really, really dangerous going in expecting to get a certain lineup at this point, but once the hero pool is much broader and there's multiple heroes that can fit those important roles, then that will definitely be something you can actually do.
So right now, skill is kind of outweighing draft strategy, because if you can just be better, then you don't have to rely as much on that, would you say?
It's more like the way you approach the draft has to be more in terms of priorities than necessarily having a specific set lineup. You can't be like, I want these 4 heroes. But you can be like, okay, I think ranged DPS is most important and most rare, so we're going to pick those first and prioritize that. And then bruisers are really important, but not quite as rare, so we're going to pick them next. And supports we can kind of do with the second or third best if we really have to, so we can pick them last, that kind of thing.
That makes sense.
Just making sure you have the flexibility to deal with whatever you're going to end up being able to get.
Okay.
So is that how you've been typically approaching it when you've been going in versus other teams? Do you look at their compositions at all a little bit, or, you know, like, how do you do it?
You definitely do, especially against a good team like SMG. They have heroes that they just really excel with and they're really good at taking advantage of, and compositions that really play to their style. They love to backdoor, so giving them Bloodlust is really dangerous because that's great at pushing down buildings.
Yeah.
So in that case, then you have to kind of worry about it. Like if they have a Tychus and a Tassadar, then you're going to want to pick Rhaegar, because Rhaegar is just overall good and it works so well with theirs. But like I said, the Diablo example, it's better for you to just pick good heroes and be aware that they're going to have kind of a teamfight combo that you have to deal with, than to pick the Diablo and have him as dead weight on your team. So it's a really delicate balance in terms of, because a lot of teams will do that, especially if they're playing against a better team. It feels like they get intimidated. And they're like, well, it's really scary if they have that combo, we can't let them have it. But it's also really scary if they have that combo, we can't let them have that either. So they'll get like half of everything, and then you end up with just a generic good lineup, and their lineup makes no sense together. And so yeah, they stopped you from having all the good synergies, but you still just have better heroes in general.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. JC's stocking up on ideas to try to beat me in our draft.
I just know I have to ban Kerrigan.
She's awful now.
I know. I know. I was so sad.
Anna just loves her so much.
I was so sad when Greg didn't even mention her in the Assassins. I know that people are saying she's super UP, if you will, right now.
They massively over-nerfed her in the last patch.
But she looks really cool.
Yes. Her master skin. I want to ask one more question from chat really fast, because this is also something that I had a question about and forgot. Earlier when you mentioned damage dealers, you listed Tassadar as that, and somebody asked if you could give your thoughts on Brightwing and Tassadar. I'm not sure Brightwing as much as Tassadar, but their damage versus their support, if they're able to go back and forth, how it works.
Brightwing's not really damage at all. She, like, Emerald Wind does some damage, but it's much more useful for the utility. And her Qs they're decent damage, I guess, but not really worth it. She's mostly used for Polymorph and either her heals over time or her Emerald Wind for disengage. But Tassadar is kind of in the situation where Malfurion was last patch. Like, he has two really, really good ultimates, and Force Wall would be fantastic on any other pickable hero. Well, depending on their kit. But Archon is just too good to pass up, especially once it gets to Twilight Archon. So you kind of really don't want to give that up unless you really, really need Force Wall. And support Tassadar is actually pretty good. If you focus on his shields and survivability and Force Wall, it can provide a lot of utility on some maps and can be legitimately pretty good. But Archon, in general, is just too good to pass up. It, like, turns him into a super survival assassin with a lot of utility as well.
I like the possibility of more heroes kind of filling dual roles, depending on how you build them.
Yeah, that's one thing that they've done really, really well with all the supports. Almost every support can either be played as a pretty sustained, focused healer type, or for a lot of utility, either CC. Like, Furion can either go pretty heavy on the healing and be one of the better sustained supports, even though he got nerfed kind of hard, or he can go very big on brutes, which gives him some of the biggest AoE snares in the game. And he can get silence, which completely shuts down a lot of melee heroes. So he has a lot of back and forth. Pretty much every support except Lily has a lot of back and forth in terms of that.
Sad panda.
Literally. Okay, well, this is actually about the point in our show where, a few minutes after the point in our show, where we would normally take a little break and then get ready for our play session. And like I said, we're not going to do our play session, but we are going to take just a brief break, just a couple minutes, don't go anywhere, and then we'll be back with our practice draft. Character spotlight, where Greg will share a build for a hero that he chose. We'll do a quick community spotlight and tell you about something in the community, and we will also do our quiz. So start thinking of questions that you want to ask us from what we've learned today. There's a lot of information, so pick wisely, and we will be right back.